And now, Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this Monday, August 26, 2019 day. I am your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you have decided to join us today. Kerby Anderson is off for the day, and you have to put up with me. And so count me thankful that you have decided to spend this happy dog day together with me. Over 70 million Americans own a dog. It's a little under 70 million Americans own a dog. It's a little under 40% of the adult population that we celebrate. This our canines, man's best friend on this day. We'll be touching on a little of the statistics behind dog ownership here in the U.S. later on during the program. But today, this program, we've got quite a bit of news that we'll be touching on throughout this first hour of the show. We'll be touching a little bit on the idea that the former congressman out of Ohio, I believe, Representative Joe Walsh, has decided to put his hat in the ring for the Republican primary. Winston Churchill had a phrase that he used to say that the further I look back into the past, the more clearly I can see into the future. And so if we look back into the past, what does that reveal to us here in the present, especially considering former Congressman Walsh's run as we venture closer and closer to that 2020 campaign? And so we'll take a look at that. We'll switch gears a little bit, and we'll talk about how Representative Walsh is jumping in to continue his career, but Andrew Luck, the quarterback for the Indianapolis Colts, has unexpectedly, surprisingly, decided to retire. He is retiring at the age of 29 years old, came out of that 2012 draft class that had so much promise and potential. But now after 6 seasons with the Indianapolis Colts, 6 seasons in the NFL period, he is hanging it up in a surprising fashion on Saturday during the midst of the preseason game. So imagine this. You spent 6 seasons living your dream in the NFL, and then news breaks during the midst of the third quarter while you're on the sidelines nursing an ankle and calf injury. News breaks that you are going to be retiring, and so the fans, it's quite a sight to see. And so we'll post it on our Facebook page. The fans started booing him when he was walking out. And so there is some segments of the audience that would say that Luck has quit and you should never quit. There are other segments that would say he's simply disengaging from his goals. He refuses to give in to the sunk cost fallacy. And so we'll explore a little bit of that as well. And then obviously moving forward, there is this 2020 campaign that continues to roll on. And we'll have Jonathan Merritt joining us over the phone. Jonathan Merritt is a writer on religion, culture, and politics, contributing editor for The Week, also writes for The Atlantic as well. He'll be joining us over the phone to talk about, can Democrats get the evangelical vote? You have individuals like Pete Buttigieg and others that are courting evangelical votes, specifically with some of their hires that they're making, and so reaching out and having a religion or evangelical or Christian outreach director. We'll be talking with Jonathan over the phone about this, and then obviously we will be welcoming some of your conversations and some of your comments as well over the phone as well as on Facebook. So you can keep up with us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Again, that website is www.facebook.com/pointofviewradio, and we'll have a live video feed there. And then right underneath that live video feed box, there's a comment box, as is often the case on Facebook. And so you can join the conversation and add your point of view to the topics of the day. And so you can do that. And what you share online, we'll try to get to over air as well. And then obviously we still have the phone. And so we want to welcome your comments on some of the topics and conversations we'll be having today. So you can do so at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Well, let's jump into it, shall we? So Joe Walsh has decided to take on President Trump in the 2020 Republican primary campaign. He announced yesterday on George Stephanopoulos' This Week on ABC. The conservative radio host and former Illinois Congressman Joe Walsh, not Ohio, like I said earlier, Illinois, will challenge President Donald Trump for the Republican presidential nomination in 2020. He says, quote, "I'm going to run for president. The country cannot afford to have him being Trump, win. If I'm not successful, I'm not voting for him," close quote. What was fascinating, though, is that, as is often the case in this internet age, as quickly as former Congressman Walsh decided that he was going to run, individuals started to do research and to resurface old tweets and comments and videos that Congressman Walsh has made in the past. And so within the show, Walsh went ahead and apologized for his past comments, which he said played a role in President Trump's ascension. He says, quote, "I helped create Trump. There's no doubt about that," close quote, he said. He said, quote, "At times I expressed hate for my political opponents. We now see where this can lead. There's no place in politics for personal attacks like that, and I regret making them." So this raises the question, what is the type of hate that he expressed for presidential candidates? Well, let's take a look, shall we? So in 2014, Walsh was pulled off the air during his radio show for using racist slurs, according to USA Today. He was also an individual that promoted the birther conspiracy during former President Barack Obama's time in office and said President Obama was only elected because of the color of his skin. When asked by Stephanopoulos on Sunday to address instances of his own racism, including his promotion of the false conspiracy that President Obama is a Muslim and remarks against Kamala Harris, the senator out of California, Walsh said, "I said some ugly things about President Obama that I regret." In a 2017 tweet, he said, "We lowered the bar for Obama. He was held to a lower standard because he was black," Walsh said in a tweet. On Sunday, he said, "I had strong policy disagreements with Barack Obama, and too often I let those policy disagreements get personal." But the personal attacks are something that he has done in the past. But now he faces who he considers to be the individual that he helped to bring up, which is President Trump. And so what does this reveal? So if we take Churchill's quote, looking back to the past in order that we can more clearly see into the future, as we look back into the past, I think there are two particular instances that reveal something about this future run, this run into the future, rather, that the former Congressman Joe Walsh is going to be making over these coming months. In particular, I want us to take a look at what happened in 1992 when President George H.W. Bush was running for re-election. An individual very familiar on the political scene, Pat Buchanan, decided to challenge him. And then I want us to go all the way back to 1980, a time in which I was not born, but wish I was born to be able to watch that 1980, the infamous Democratic Convention, the infighting between then President Jimmy Carter running for re-election and the challenge within the Democratic Party by Senator Teddy Kennedy, rather. But we have got to take a break right now. But when we come back from the break, I want us to look a little bit further back at the past in order that we can see more clearly into the future, our present state. But we've got to take a break right now. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Here's a question for you. If one government program creates a major problem so that you need a government bailout to fix that problem, wouldn't it make more sense not to implement the government program in the first place? That is the question some are asking about the current proposal known as Medicare for All. Recently, Senator Bernie Sanders proposed a $20 billion federal bailout for struggling hospitals. He announced this plan in Philadelphia because one of the hospitals is currently in bankruptcy proceedings. The editors of the Wall Street Journal observed that usually politicians pass a bailout to clean up a mess they created in the past. In this case, they suggest the senator wants taxpayers to save hospitals after he bankrupts them. Let me explain why they say that. The hospital in Philadelphia currently has nearly two-thirds of their patients on government insurance, either Medicare or Medicaid. Those programs are notorious for paying hospitals less than what it costs to provide services. Some estimate that they pay about 90% or even less than the actual cost of care. So how do hospitals traditionally cover their cost? Well, they shift cost onto private insurers, which tend to pay more than 140% of cost, at least according to the American Hospital Association. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services report that more than two-thirds of hospitals are losing money on Medicare inpatient services. If Medicare for All was implemented, hospitals would go broke. That is what former member of Congress John Delaney said in the June Democratic presidential debate. He said if you go to hospitals and ask them what would happen if they were paid at the Medicare rate, every single hospital administrator said they would close. Perhaps you can now see why the editors at the Wall Street Journal pointed to this hospital bailout as a preview of what could happen with Medicare for All. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Affirm Films and the Kendrick Brothers, Overcomer, starring Alex Kendrick and Priscilla Shire, rated PG, now playing in theaters. Overcomermovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, substituting in for Kerby Anderson today. So grateful that you have decided to join us. We've been talking about former Congressman Joe Walsh's attempt to beat President Trump in the Republican primary. He is challenging President Trump in this 2020 campaign, and it's going to be very interesting because, as has been previously reported, former Congressman Walsh is not the only individual that's challenging President Trump. On this, you have Mark Sanford, who was the former governor and congressman out of South Carolina, that's also challenging him. Our listeners maybe remember Mr. Sanford during his jaunt away from his governor duties to see to a kind of a relationship that he was having that took him, I believe, to South America somewhere. I can't remember, that caused quite a bit of a scandal and a little bit of a charge, but he since recovered and then ended up running and then successfully winning the seat to represent a district out of South Carolina in the U.S. Congress. And then also there is Mr. Bill Weld. Bill Weld, as many people will remember, this isn't his first time in electoral politics. Mr. Weld ran on the Libertarian ticket this past election in 2016. He was the former governor of Massachusetts from 1991 to 1997, and he's got a great birthday. I mean, I hate to brag. I'm going to show my bias a little bit like CNN, but he's got a birthday that just happens to share it with me. But nevertheless, joining a kind of beginning to be a crowded field with the incumbent in it is not an easy task to win that seat, especially when President Trump holds an approval rating among Republicans at 84%. 84% of Republicans approve of President Trump. But there's two individuals I want us to look at. There's two instances in history I want us to look at to better get a glimpse of what the future could hold. And in particular, I'm basing that out, framing it out of what Winston Churchill said, that the further I look back into the past, the more clearly I see into the future. Of what Shakespeare quipped, the past is often prologue. It's this idea that the past can inform us and help us better understand as we navigate our way through the future. It's kind of like what even Kierkegaard, I feel like there's a number of individuals that utilize the past in order when looking to the future, when Kierkegaard said this idea that I understand looking back, but I live moving forward. And so let's look back for a second and raising the question, does the past reveal clues for us in the present as we consider the 2020 election? Well, let's first go back to 1992. 1992, Pat Buchanan, the fiery, I don't even know how to describe him. He's held so many names. He's a prolific author, was a part of the Nixon administration, challenged then President George H.W. Bush for the Republican nomination. Though he went down in defeat, he did give a very strong showing in the early races of that 1992 campaign. But what will probably he will go down or he has gone down in history rather, for the convention speech that I think still reverberates today. He said during that convention speech, quote, "There's a religious war going on in this country. It is a culture war, as critical to the kind of nation we shall be as the Cold War itself. For this war is for the soul of America." He uttered those words and he concluded with a rousing call to, quote, "take back our cities, take back our culture, and to take back our country," close quote. That was the beginnings of what we started to see of this idea of the cultural war beginning to foment. This was a time when we're starting to see the very tremors of individuals that feel as though they're losing their sense of the culture. They're losing their sense of the country that they were born into. And so he is playing upon some of those cultural wars in order to try to gin up support. And it really was it was an electric time when he delivered this speech. I went back and listened to it on YouTube earlier this morning. And again, it was a rousing call, to say the very least. And what we saw then is that we started to see the I would say the solidification of what we see with President Trump, of this idea of speaking to and really stoking some of those cultural war fires. But this isn't just limited to the party on the right as well. We can look over to the left. And then that's where the infamous Democratic primary nomination of 1980 took place, with Senator Kennedy challenging then President Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter, there's a great book that just came out earlier this year by John Ward entitled Camelot's End. And John Ward makes a fascinating comparison between President Trump then, but also between this Jimmy Carter and the Jimmy Carter race, that I think was really fascinating for us as we consider moving forward what it's going to look like in this particular race. So Ward compellingly captures this monumental fight within the Democratic Party. He says, quote, "This was a story where the last of the Kennedys lost, where Carter lost at a time in our history when America seemed to just keep losing." And so he frames it in the extent of a losingness. There's just a lot of loss. There's a lot of defeat. But Ward makes a fascinating comparison in his conclusion. He says, quote, "Whether Trump is the last gasp of the Reagan coalition, just as Carter marked the end of the FDR era for the Democratic Party, remains to be seen," close quote. So what Ward is wanting to attempt to do when he points back to that 1980 primary fight is he's wanting to reveal that these two monumental forces within the Democratic Party in 1980, you've got the Jimmy Carters of the world and the Ted Kennedys of the world. Ted Kennedy obviously touting and being a strong advocate during that time for health care reform, which, again, it's kind of shocking when you think about it today. We're still talking about reforms on healthcare, the healthcare reform, and then you've also got education, which were just two strong issues that really did resonate within a particular segment of the Democratic process. But then you've got Jimmy Carter as well, very much representing the working man, just being that blue dog, what we have come to know, or really has come to become extinct, rather, the blue dog Democrat that makes up the Democratic Party during that time. And what Ward contends is in that 1980 election, you had these two segments, large segments of the Democratic Party really crystallize and solidify. But in the loss of Kennedy, one, and then in the loss of Carter, two, you begin to see having to remake the Democratic Party. And remaking that party really when they're largely out of power, because obviously Reagan is going to go on to an astounding and significant victory in that 1980 election, winning over 40 states in the Electoral College. just trouncing Carter, and then going back and winning, I believe, 49 states in 1984, and to such a great degree that he was able to form what were known as Reagan Democrats, just really expanding the base during that time. And then in 1988, you continue to see individuals that want to see the extension of that Reagan presidency, electing George H.W. Bush until 1992, when another little man from Hope, Arkansas, comes on board. And Bill Clinton, what he had to do was this remaking of the Democratic Party in the midst of kind of in the minority. What they did is Bill Clinton, again, institutionalized some of those changes that they sought to make with this new Democratic Party. And primarily, you can look to the Democratic Leadership Council that he formed in the early 1990s to appeal to a more moderate voter. It wasn't necessarily moving further left. What Clinton did is he moved closer to the center with that DLC, the creation of the Democratic Leadership Council. And what happened then is obviously Bill Clinton went on to win, and then we started to see a changing of what it means to be a Democrat, one. But then also just now what we're seeing, potentially could be seeing, is this what the Democrats went through in 1980 with the loss of Kennedy and then Carter and then going into the dark. Could this potentially be what could become the remaking of the Republican Party, where you just have these two forces that are the significant forces that are at work within the Republican Party of the Trumps, and then what are affectionately called never Trumps, but I think they better be called sometimes Trumpers. Is this going to be a remaking of the party? But let's go back to why the whole point of view is how do we understand this from a biblical perspective? You can consider me skeptical of Walsh's chances, but they remind us of our obligation to vote. The civic benefit is a divine opportunity for us to love our neighbor in a systemic fashion. Walsh wants your vote, but the biblical narrative should influence your vote. We have a unique opportunity every 2 years, every 4 years, to love our neighbor by casting our ballot. And it's increasingly important for us not only to sanctify our lives to God, but our vote as well. We'll be back right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. On this Monday, August 26, 2019 day, I've said before at the beginning of the show that it's Happy Dog Day. It's National Dog Day. Every dog has its day, apparently, and this is Man's Best Friend Day here in the U.S. to call attention to our best friends, our canines. But I also want to highlight another significant fact about today. And that is, it's the first day of school. It's the first day back for students at Dallas Baptist University. And I can go ahead and tell you that it is brimming with excitement over at Dallas Baptist University. It's just very interesting. There's this refrain that's often kind of proclaimed when I'm in particular circles. It's almost like DBU is Dallas's best kept secret. And I love it, but I also hate it. I love it because individuals have significant value and they think highly of Dallas Baptist University. And for that, I am exceedingly grateful. But also, I hate it in that more people don't know about it. Because think about this. We have got here in the Dallas area, because primarily this is a Dallas audience, Dallas Baptist University has upwards of 5,000 students that are going to be embarking on their educational endeavors today. Maybe this is their first day of higher education, or perhaps it's the first day of this particular semester. But of those 5,000 students at Dallas Baptist University, they represent over 50 countries are represented on that campus today. Of the 5,000, over 600 of those students come from a different country, coming from to and fro, from far and close, to be able to study there. And then when you think about it, Dallas Baptist University, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, the majority of those students are going into some type of vocational ministry. But that couldn't be further from the truth. The reality is that Dallas Baptist University, the students that are going there, 90% of them will go into a non-vocational ministry. Essentially, what they are wanting to do is to integrate their learning with their faith, to figure out what does it mean for the righteous to live by faith as I exercise my skill sets in the boardroom, or in finance, or in the classroom, or in the home, or in business. These are individuals that feel called by God to himself, one, and then two, to deploy their gifts in such a way that they might make his kingdom come, his will be done in various other areas of society. Yes and amen to building up the church of Christ, of Jesus Christ, of helping the church into being an active member of a church. But the vast majority of students that are going to Dallas Baptist University are looking to pursue after excellence in their field without forsaking faithfulness to Christ. And for that, I'm exceedingly grateful to be a part of that university, a small part, one, but also two, to invite you to direct your attention there, whether you're interested in supporting that university, or two, you're interested in furthering your education. You can go to www.d as in Dallas, B as in Baptist, U as in under. Get it? I was going to put university, but I did under instead. dbu.edu to find out more information on Dallas Baptist University. I can guarantee this. There are not a lot of things I can guarantee. I can guarantee that the Titans will be a joy to my soul in 2 weeks. I can guarantee that you will never disappoint eating pork barbecue in Tennessee. And I can guarantee that you will not regret giving a second thought to Dallas Baptist University. Whether that's going and checking out the website, or paying a visit to campus. I'd be happy to help show you around, as well as show you some of the great things that are happening on that campus. But nevertheless, let's continue into the news, shall we? Speaking of the Titans, and speaking of kind of, to a certain degree, football, Andrew Luck has retired. The Colts quarterback stuns the NFL, according to the Indy Star, with shocking retirement decision at the age of 29. So Andrew Luck was a Pro Bowl quarterback in the face of the Indianapolis Colts, if you'll remember, has decided to retire after a career defined by wins and injuries. Luck sustained severe injuries throughout his career. He missed 9 games in 2015. He missed the entire 2017 season, the 2018 season. He comes back, wins a comeback player of the year, much to my chagrin as a Titans fan, because he beats us in the first round of the playoffs. Not that I'm still bitter. Maybe if I just say that I'm not bitter, I won't be bitter. I'm still bitter. Luck was the number one overall pick in the 2012 draft, was an instant star for the Colts, helping offset the loss of another Tennessean, Peyton Manning, another franchise icon who was cut by the team after he dealt with serious injuries of his own. Luck said, quote, "I felt stuck, and the only way out of it is to no longer play football. It's taken my joy away from the game." And so as a Titans fan, I welcome this news. He had our number. He was sporting an 11-0 record against us, but injury shortened the number of his playing days. Over 6 seasons, Luck suffered from torn cartilage in 2 ribs, a partially torn abdomen, a lacerated kidney, a concussion, a torn labrum in his throwing shoulder, and a calf injury. Though his career lasted only 6 seasons, the average career in the NFL is less than 3 years. For quarterbacks, that number is 3 years and a month. Luck's decision exhibits the concept known as the sunk cost fallacy. Instead of continuing an endeavor as a result of previously invested resources, time, money, efforts, Luck is hanging up his cleats. Some have said Luck is quitting, but doggedly pursuing a particular goal can be detrimental. There really was 2 reactions that came out of the news when Luck decided that he was going to transition out of football. I like to consider them the Gottlieb piece, the Gottlieb camp, and then the Troy Aikman camp. Gottlieb representing the Fox Sports 1 basketball sport, just essentially he was a sports analyst. And so Doug Gottlieb of Fox Sports 1 said, quote, "Retiring because rehabbing is, quote, too hard is the most millennial thing ever. Hashtag Andrew Luck." Troy Aikman, in response, 15 hours later, said, quote, "That's total bad word, Doug. What qualifies you to decide how someone should live their life? So you're now the authority on what motivates Andrew Luck, and if his decisions don't fit into what you think is best for him, then you rip him. Guess that keeps you employed on Fox Sports 1, quote, nice." So there's 2 camps that really continue to battle it out, whether this was a selfish move or kind of a millennial move by Luck to just quit, or if this was the right move for him. The research is really clear. Football is just very hard on the body. Luck joins a class such as Barry Sanders, Rob Gronkowski, and others to retire early before they're forced into retirement due to injuries. But Luck has decided to stop. And so I was really interested in thinking about this from a biblical perspective. Are there individuals in the biblical narrative that had to quit, or that were called to quit, or that were told to quit? And I couldn't help but think about Abraham. Abraham really epitomized this idea of the sunk cost fallacy. He didn't hang up his cleats, but he did hang on his hopes for Ishmael. Remember in Genesis 17 where Abraham has been toiling, has been investing. As Chuck Swindoll said, children, when you have a child, you're putting deposits into the bank of their future. That Abraham, up until this point for years, has been just teaching Ishmael, teaching him to grow in wisdom and stature and understanding and all of these matters. And so for all of these years, Abraham has been working underneath the mentality that God, because of his original promise in Genesis 12, is going to bless and use Ishmael in order that the kingdom, in order that the line would go through Ishmael. But then in Genesis 17, God reveals to Abraham, tells Abraham that he is going to have another child. And so Abraham, the one married to Sarah, the one who laughed at this idea, decides that God's going to redirect his plans. But there's a key phrase that Abraham utters that I think is pretty significant for us relative to our purposes, not only for this story, but also just contextually as well. It's this line that Abraham utters that he says, "Oh, that Ishmael might live before you." Oh, that Ishmael might live before you. You see, in that particular moment, Abraham wanted God to sprinkle blessing on his current plans, But what God wanted to do was do something brand new. He didn't want to just sprinkle blessing on the current. He wanted to create something anew. Abraham wanted God to bless his plans, but God wanted to do something greater than he could imagine. And so this required Abraham to quit in order that he might be able to redirect his energies towards something new. Quitting is never an easy decision, and oftentimes there's a lot of resources that are lost, quote unquote, when you make the decision. Quitting is never easy, but sometimes it is the very best decision. And so the best of luck to Andrew Luck as he moves into this new season of his career. We've got to go to a break, but when we come back from the break, we are going to be talking a little bit more about the news of the day right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. On this Monday, August 27th, 2019 day, we have been talking about a wide host of issues. We talked a little bit about Andrew Luck and his decision to retire early. I hate to even say it, to retire early at the age of 29 years old, because in reality, I mean, when you put it in the proper context, I think the reason why we say retire early is because we have bright hopes and our own assumptions of how long he would play. But in reality, he lasted longer than the average being a little under 3 years, but for the quarterback position being 3 years and 1 month. And in a shocking twist, he lasted twice as long as the average quarterback in the league, but not nearly as long as the superhuman that is known as Tom Brady, that seems to never retire anytime soon. But so he just retired at 29. He didn't retire early, he retired. And so we talked a little bit about that and the biblical idea of trying to understand when it is that sometimes we just have this negative perception of what quitting is, when in reality, we can't give in to the sunk cost fallacy, the idea that just because we've invested so many time, resources, and treasures into a particular endeavor doesn't mean we have to keep on failing or keep on hurting ourselves detrimentally. And sometimes the most biblical thing we can do in the concept is called goal disengagement, to better understand like how am I not stewarding the resources and talents that God has given me that are being neglected right now because I'm doggedly pursuing after a particular goal that perhaps is not what God is calling me to. And so I wish the best of luck to Andrew Luck as he continues on this endeavor, outlasting the average NFL quarterback career, and as he transitions into this new role in society, whatever that may be. I think he went to this little school called Stanford, which is known as the Dallas Baptist University of California. And so he's going to, I think he's going to be just fine in his new role out there. Then we talked a little bit about Congressman Joe Walsh out of Illinois. The former congressman has decided that he is going to challenge President Trump, and touched on a little bit about how the 1980 Democratic nomination process really did reveal some fractures within the Democratic Party that inevitably sent them to reform themselves over the next 12 years with the reemergence of a new Democratic Party underneath the leadership of a man from Hope named Bill Clinton. And could it not be that Joe Walsh, in his pursuit after the Republican nomination in 2020, could also be sending trimmers as well? Who knows? But we do know that there has been some, there's been lack of stability within on the global stage would be an understatement. To say there's been a lack of stability and predictability within the market would be an understatement. And so where to begin when we're talking about what the G7 meetings that are happening today and ending today, I believe, in France. And so let's just take one of the storylines, shall we? There's so many storylines we could pursue in this particular end. One, we can pursue how President Trump and the Prime Minister, the leader of Japan, are hosting conversations right now where it appears as though Japan is we're going to enter into a type of special trading relationship with Japan. We could talk about President Trump and his bilateral talks with the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson, and how it seems as though they are on the same page when it comes to the Brexit. We can talk a little bit about Angela Merkel making her way into her last G7, last of what seems like over 10 years worth of G7 meetings as the leader and the representative of Germany during this time. But I think what's important for us is, or I guess what the thing that a lot of people are talking about today is when the foreign policy minister of Iran showed up unexpectedly on Sunday to the G7 summit and headed straight to the buildings where leaders of the world's major democracies have been debating how to handle the country's nuclear ambitions. France's surprise invitation was a high-stakes gamble for French President Emmanuel Macron, who is the host of the Group of Seven gathering in France. Macron said the leaders agreed during a dinner the night before that the French president could serve as a G7 messenger to Iran. G7 leaders regrouped on Sunday to focus on what they can do to boost growth at a time of heightened uncertainty. And uncertainty would be the understatement of the hour when it comes to that. Obviously, France has been playing a role as trying to be kind of the go-between moderator between Iran and the U.S. to try to persuade President Trump to get back into the Iran nuclear deal that President Trump backed out of earlier in 2017, but receiving no success thus far. You know, Henry Kissinger asserted that the task of a leader is to get people where they are to where they have not been. That unknown place, according to Robert Kagan in his new book, The Jungle Grows Back, is the post-liberal world order created after World War II. Consider the events which took place over the weekend. North Korea tested a new super-large rocket launcher. South Korea staged military exercises on a set of islands that are the source of territorial dispute with Japan. Hong Kong police deployed water cannons on protesters as young as 12. Israeli warplanes shot down Iranian killer drones in Syria. And President Trump threatened American businesses to leave China and due to the ongoing trade war. According to Kagan, some of these events functions as, quote, vines and weeds that work to, quote, undermine and overwhelm, close quote. This liberal order, he says, is, quote, like a garden, artificial and forever threatened by forces of nature, close quote, like authoritarian foreign powers such as China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. This morning, we're all venturing into an unknown place with a very known God. And join me in praying for our world leaders. The God of this world holds all things together, and hopefully leaders in this world can wisely order it to bring about peace. So we're going to have to take another break. But before we take a break, I want to direct your attention to a couple of things. One, we've got our Point of View website where you can find out more information on some of our coming guests here in the upcoming hour. Direct your attention to pointofview.net, www.pointofview.net. You can find out more information on our first guest during the next hour, Jonathan Merritt. He's going to be talking with us around the topic of can Democrats get the evangelical vote, as some of the recent news out of the 2020 campaign on the Democratic side indicate that there are a couple of candidates that have hired faith outreach directors. And will they be successful in courting the evangelical vote? And joining us for the second part of the hour from 1:30 to 2, we'll have Karen Kataline, who will be talking a little bit about Representative Omar accuses those she hates of being phobic. And so some of the consternation, some of the conversations that have been happening around the members of the squad and claims of being anti-Semitic. We'll talk to Karen a little bit more about that and how we should be thinking about that, and if there's anything to do relative to some of that controversy that continues to surround that coverage. And then finally, I want to direct your attentions as well to the briefing website. And so the Daily Briefing is a newsletter that I put together every morning that highlights the news of the day, as well as news that reveals the spirit of the day, and tries to give you a biblical perspective as to how we might think and consider these particular items. You can sign up for the Daily Briefing at www.thebriefing.net. Again, www.thebriefing.net. But we've got to go to a break right now. But when we come back from the break, we're going to be joined by the Atlantic's Jonathan Merritt to talk about the 2020 campaign and how Democratic candidates are vying for the evangelical vote with some of their recent hires, as well as Karen Kataline is going to be joining us to talk a little bit about the squad and the claims of anti-Semitism that have been arising amongst them. But we have got to go to a break. But when we come back, more from Point of View right after this.
Point of View is committed to spreading the truth, oftentimes a truth that those in political power don't like getting heard. But the only way it can be heard is if our team stands strong together, if you do what you can to support the Point of View Truth Team. It's having an impact, as we heard recently from U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert.
Everywhere I go, I hear people that you have influenced, that Point of View has affected. You have made such a difference, and you rely on people to contribute, and if they don't contribute, then that truth does not get heard.
Help Point of View make a difference. Pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more. Please do what you can. 1-800-347-5151, or visit online, pointofview.net. Look near the top right for the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team, 800-347-5151, and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this Monday, August 26, 2019 day. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you have decided to join us today. And we have got a packed hour for you. During the first part of the hour, for the first 30 minutes, we'll be joined by Jonathan Merritt, who's the award-winning writer on religion, culture, and politics, serves as a contributing writer at The Atlantic and a contributing editor for The Week, and is author of several critically acclaimed books, including them Learning to Speak God from Scratch and various others. Jonathan will be joining us over the phone here shortly. And then the second part of the hour, we'll be joined by Karen Kataline, who's going to be talking a little bit about this anti-Semitism that seems to be on the rise within the House of Representatives around members of the squad. Is there a legitimacy to the claims of anti-Semitism that's kind of been surfaced in recent days, or is this much to do about nothing? And so we'll be joined by Karen later on during the hour, but we have got Jonathan Merritt on now joining us over the phone. Jonathan, how are you?
Hey, it's so good to be with you. It's my pleasure.
Hey, great to have you on. And so, Jonathan, we're talking a little bit during this first part of the hour about the 2020 campaign, and we've got some recent additions that have been made on the Democratic side. Some of the Democratic candidates, specifically, you've got Cory Booker as well as Pete Buttigieg. Mayor Pete from South Bend, Indiana, have added on some faith directors, some faith outreach directors, really thinking they potentially might have a chance to be able to vie for some of that evangelical religious vote coming into the 2020 election. What are your thoughts on some of these additions?
You know, it's interesting on the one hand that you're seeing such a strong push to reach out to religious Americans coming from the left, from Democrats. You know, they have historically been wrestling with what's been called the God gap, which is this gap between religious and non-religious voters who connect with politicians on the left. Traditionally, if you have a strong belief in God, if church attendance is important to you, politically in the United States, you're going to more than likely skew right of center. But I think now you have many Democrats, and it's a wide field. I believe now, even with the recent dropouts, we have 2021 candidates who are still running to be the Democratic candidate for president of the United States. You've got this push where I think they smell blood in the water, whether it's a good inclination or not. I think that they believe that Donald Trump, perhaps because of his personal morality and some of the failings in his personal life, or just his overall tone and tenor, has turned off some religious Americans, and that maybe those individuals are now, they're up for grabs. Whether or not they'll be able to capture those voters or whether their read on that is correct, I think is a matter for debate. But there are Democrats now who see religious Americans as a viable area of growth in terms of a voting bloc for the Democratic Party.
I think you're onto something, and I think the numbers kind of substantiate some of your claims. Now, we talked about earlier about how Joe Walsh, who was the former congressman out of Illinois, has decided to challenge President Trump in the 2020 nomination process, joining Bill Weld, who was the former governor out of Massachusetts, Libertarian candidate in 2016. But there does seem to be a growing contingent of individuals who do think that there is some type of chance. Now, there's a couple of numbers to kind of substantiate this, but also paint how small a window it is. And I'd love to hear some of your comments on this. So we've got the approval rating for President Trump is at 84% right now relative to Republicans. But there was a fascinating morning consult poll that came out over in the beginning of the the beginning of the summer that indicated that 55% of white evangelical Protestants said they preferred to see Trump as the GOP's nominee in the 2020 presidential election, even when given such options as Vice President Mike Pence or other Republican figures. That's 16 percentage points less than the share of self-identified Republicans who said the same. Now, granted, I know that white evangelical voters, there's more than simply just white evangelical voters that make up religious voters. But do you think, give me your honest take. What is it that about President Trump relative to just kind of some of his overtures that he's made, some of the comments that he's made? Do you really think that there's an opening here for one, maybe for a challenger within the Republican Party, or two, potentially for someone outside of the kind of Republican Party and the Democratic side that's going to be able to kind of capture the zeitgeist of, say, Jimmy Carter or someone to be able to capture some of that evangelical or religious vote?
Well, there are massive hurdles on both sides. For one, with a person like Joe Walsh, for example, there's just the improbability that if you try to chip away at the Republican vote, particularly for an incumbent, which is an incumbent historically is very, very hard to defeat in American politics. You've got this question of whether Americans, conservative Americans, who maybe just don't like Trump all that much, would be willing to, quote, as they would see it, throw their vote away for someone like this. Now, we saw, I think, with Evan McMullin and Jill Stein and some other kind of protest candidates in the last election, they didn't get a lot of votes. And traditionally, I think when you look at voters in the United States, they're fairly pragmatic. They won't vote for someone out of principle if they don't believe that person has an actual chance of becoming president of the United States. So I think that the effect on the vote for Trump among these kind of protest candidates will be minimal. I think that's fairly safe to say. When you look at Democrats, you have another issue, and the issue, namely, is abortion. And the question is whether or not individuals on the right will be willing to vote for a pro-choice candidate. And if you've been watching this field, they're not just pro-choice. They are very, very pro-choice. In fact, the only candidate who was somewhat moderate on this was Joe Biden. And ever since he's jumped in this race, he's become more and more extreme, even saying that he would support overturning the Hyde Amendment, which would allow us to take federal dollars toward organizations that provide abortion specifically to the act of providing the abortion. And that's going to be very controversial. So there are a lot of conservatives out there that I cannot imagine they will be willing to swallow the pro-choice pill in order to vote for a Democrat simply because they don't like Donald Trump. So will they be able to capture some religious voters? Sure. Will it be enough to make a difference? I'm very skeptical.
Yeah, and so we have got to take a break, but when we come back from the break, we're going to be talking a little bit more with Jonathan Merritt about religious voters in the 2020 campaign, specifically, regardless of whether individuals end up going third party, whether they vote Democrat, whether they vote for President Trump, the variety of options that's available to the religious voter just abounds in the 2020 campaign election. But what I'm interested in talking with Jonathan about after the break is trying to identify what are those particular issues that these religious voters are interested in outside of traditionally the abortion issue, as Jonathan has so illuminated, and kind of the ancillary of that being the Supreme Court and justices appointed. What are those issues that really are resonating among religious voters? And then specifically with white evangelicals, which in recent past, over the past 30 years, have really gravitated towards the Republican Party. Why is it that they haven't been able to coalesce around President Trump? What are the issues? Why aren't their issues and satisfactions being met? We'll be back, though, right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Here's a question for you. If one government program creates a major problem so that you need a government bailout to fix that problem, wouldn't it make more sense not to implement the government program in the first place? That is the question some are asking about the current proposal known as Medicare for All. Recently, Senator Bernie Sanders proposed a $20 billion federal bailout for struggling hospitals. He announced this plan in Philadelphia because one of the hospitals is currently in bankruptcy proceedings. The editors of the Wall Street Journal observed that usually politicians pass a bailout to clean up a mess they created in the past. In this case, they suggest the senator wants taxpayers to save hospitals after he bankrupts them. Let me explain why they say that. The hospital in Philadelphia currently has nearly two-thirds of their patients on government insurance, either Medicare or Medicaid. Those programs are notorious for paying hospitals less than what it costs to provide services. Some estimate that they pay about 90% or even less than the actual cost of care. So how do hospitals traditionally cover their cost? Well, they shift costs onto private insurers, which tend to pay more than 140% of costs, at least according to the American Hospital Association. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services report that more than two-thirds of hospitals are losing money on Medicare inpatient services. If Medicare for All was implemented, hospitals would go broke. That is what former member of Congress John Delaney said in the June Democratic presidential debate. He said if you go to hospitals and ask them what would happen if they were paid at the Medicare rate, every single hospital administrator said they would close. Perhaps you can now see why the editors at the Wall Street Journal pointed to this hospital bailout as a preview of what could happen with Medicare for All. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Affirm Films and the Kendrick Brothers, Overcomer, starring Alex Kendrick and Priscilla Shirer, rated PG, now playing in theaters. Overcomermovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts, joined over the phone by Atlantic writer, editor over at The Week, Jonathan Merritt. We've been talking about the 2020 campaign. You know, Jonathan, we're looking at some of the numbers, and there appears as though there's an opening for Democrats among some of those disenfranchised religious voters. I mean, even to the extent that you're starting to see with the numbers relative to conservative Protestant, not Protestant, but rather evangelicals, rather, with 55%, which is, again, a majority, but it's not as large a majority as has often been the case for a Republican nominee. And it seems as though some certain Democratic campaigns are really beginning to hopefully pounce on this opportunity. And so, and you kind of mentioned earlier during the break about this idea that they're even, to an extent, hiring faith and outreach directors onto their campaign. Share a little bit about that.
Yeah, so you have had several Democratic candidates who have hired faith outreach directors, which is can be very effective. We saw it be very, very effective during both campaigns that Barack Obama ran. He hired people like Josh Dubois, Melissa Rogers, Michael Ware, people who kind of understood how religious Americans thought, what was important to them, how they talked, and it was very effective. I think what we're seeing in this race, particularly among these candidates who seem to be making every effort to push as far to the left as possible, is they're hiring people who reflect maybe a more liberal understanding of religion, but who have almost no shot in many cases of reaching religious voters, with the exception, I think, of Joe Biden, who hired a Baptist minister to do some outreach in South Carolina. The first candidate, for example, to hire a faith outreach director was Mayor Pete Buttigieg, and he hired an LGBT activist who is a Unitarian Universalist minister that nobody's ever heard of. It just is like one of these data points that show that Democrats are, quite frankly, clueless about reaching mainstream voters. I mean, if you look at evangelical voters, if you look at conservative Catholics, they're going to find a deep level. You're going to find a deep level of distrust when it comes to Unitarian ministers. You know, it would be like hiring a Kardashian to do outreach to stay-at-home moms, or hiring Michael Vick to reach out to PETA.
Yeah,
you know,
it's just
you've got a lot of obstacles to overcome there that I think are completely unnecessary. So I think they've hamstrung themselves from the start.
Yeah. And so what are some of those issues, though, that you think would resonate that a Democratic candidate, if they had the right faith outreach director or religious outreach director, what are those issues that you think an individual that is religious in nature, that is not sold on President Trump yet, that potentially was either sold in 2016 or was on the fence or what have you? What are those issues that the religious individual could get behind with a Democratic candidate?
Well, one thing I think you've already pointed out is you're asking the right question because you're using the word issues. You know, in previous elections, values voters, as you might call them, have cared a lot about character issues. That has shifted. There was an interesting article written recently by 538 that showed they don't really care about character anymore. That's not on their radar. What they really care about is issues. So who you're going to nominate to the Supreme Court, obviously, is a big one. You know, sexuality issues are a big one. I think one of the big ones out there that is going to be a struggle for a lot of Democrats is what has been called, you know, religious liberty issues. And that's not just like Christian persecution overseas. That's obviously a big problem. But it's domestic issues that are perceived to be infringement on the liberties of religious people. So cake bakers and photographers, people who are being told that they have to run their business in a certain way or serve certain people. You have certain exemptions that were made for under the Obama administration to protect hiring practices for LGBT folks, people who have certain gender identities, even if you're a religious organization. So you have, for example, Catholic organizations who cannot be hired to run foster care programs in certain states, and the Trump administration has recently rolled that back. Immigration tends to track high, but that tends to have a bent toward national security and protecting our borders. So there are a lot of issues there that I think Democrats are going to have to give full-throated arguments for how their position arises naturally from a Christian or religious ethical framework. And right now, we're just not hearing that.
So let's switch sides over to a little bit, because again, what we're seeing is, for many, even on the right, that they're still not sold. The numbers, like only 55%. Again, that's a majority, but it's not nearly the kind of support that you would expect from a Republican candidate that is largely has delivered on kind of some of the big issues that religious voters typically really want to see when it comes to abortion, and then when it comes to the courts. President Trump still hasn't locked in religious voters. I would say the significance, the measure of religious voters that he needs to in order to be put over and to achieve victory in 2020. So if any Trump individuals are listening, what do you think are some of those issues that they want to see? Because, I mean, for example, here in Texas right now, we continue, I think the New York Times described it as a Texodus that's happening right now, where we've got upwards of, I think, 3 congressmen that have decided that they're not running for re-election right now. And so are there issues that a Republican candidate that's running, whether it's Walsh, whether it's Weld, President Trump running for re-election, in order to reach out to religious voters, what are some of those issues that they need to double down on, that they need to address?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that right now, if you look at religious voters and you look at general voters, what you're going to find is massive overlap on one issue: the economy. Mm-hmm. In fact, you know, if we direct this conversation back to Texas, there was a cover story done by Texas Monthly recently, Trump's Apostle. That was on Robert Jeffress, who's a pastor there at First Baptist Church of Dallas, who's been a big supporter of Donald Trump, and he's worked really hard to kind of whip up support for Donald Trump and even defend some of Trump's more divisive policies and divisive comments. he was asked in that interview what he could imagine Trump doing that would alienate evangelicals. And he said bluntly, although I agree with him, well, he could tank the economy. And I think that right now the biggest risk to the Trump base is what you're seeing with this trade war with China.
Mm-hmm.
It's had deleterious effects on the stock market. I think religious voters are a lot like general voters, which is they're people who look at their 401ks, they look at the equity in their house, and if that number goes down, I think he's in big trouble.
Yeah, I think another issue I'd love to have your opinion on is again, I think the immigration issue to a large degree. I think you're right to frame it in the sense that it is a security issue that, again, Pastor Jeffers has been the one to really emphasize the need for security at our borders, even to an extent of whether you agree or disagree with the way that he interpreted Acts 17. He's given boundaries and states and times for men to be placed upon this earth, regardless of the exegesis that he used to get to that particular point. I do think, especially among the suburban moms, is what much is being talked about here in Texas relative to the Texodus that potentially could be happening. I think there's opportunities for President Trump. I think there's opportunities for Republicans to really hone in to, I think there's going to be a need to be able to show a little bit more compassion when it comes to the immigration issue, coupled with that need for security that I think we all can agree on. But I think we're just missing that compassionate piece when it talks about the immigrant and the alien and the stranger coming into the land.
Yeah, you're totally right. But, whenever these decisions are made, they're never made in isolation. In other words, if you said, do you want to allow President Trump to keep kids in cages, thumbs up, thumbs down, that's going to get you one answer. But if you say, would you rather have the current policy that the Trump administration has been propagating on the border, or would you rather elect a Democrat who has essentially an open border policy?
Yeah.
Which one are you going to go with? I think that's a different kind of question. And when you look at Democrats right now, they talk a lot about what they don't want. And I can agree with that. I don't want kids in cages. I don't want families separated as a Christian myself. But if you're looking for kind of a robust, positive vision for what it means to have just immigration policies while keeping citizens safe, I'm just not hearing that come from the left. And if Americans do not hear that, I don't think they're going to be willing to jump ship and vote for a Democrat in 2020.
Well, Jonathan Merritt, thank you so much for joining us. I think one thing is clear. We can expect over the next a little under 2 years now, this is going to be a race that is bananas, to say the very least. But so grateful that you have decided to join us. If you want to find out more information on Jonathan, some of the work that he has done, maybe check out some of the books. I highly recommend Learning to Speak God from Scratch. You can go to our website, pointofview.net, and find out more information on Jonathan. But we have got to take a break right now. But when we come back from the break, we are going to be joined by Karen Kataline, who's going to be talking to us about Representative Omar and some of her comments and anti-Semitic moves, potentially, that she's been making in recent past, as well as what should we be thinking about this? And is this really just a blip in the past or a sign of things to come as the election draws near? We'll be back right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. On this Monday, August 26, 2019 day, we just got off the phone with Jonathan Merritt, the Atlantic writer, talking about the 2020 campaign. Can Democrats get the evangelical vote? And you can find out more information on Jonathan as well as the show at www.pointofview.net. Highly recommend his book, Speaking God from Scratch, on our website, and so you want to pick that up as well. Now we're going to switch gears. We've got Karen Kataline that is going to be joining us, talking a little bit about anti-Semitism and the squad, the infamous squad that has come to be affectionately known as here. Karen is a commentator, columnist, talk show host, and received her master's degree in social work from Columbia University. She's a frequent guest host on AM Talk Radio. She's a producer and host of Spouting Off, a live internet call-in talk show covering politics, pop culture, and a little psychology thrown in. Karen, how are you?
It's great to be with you, Nick. Thanks for having me.
It is. Karen, it is so great to have you. I don't know if you remember the last time we talked. We just had such a delightful back and forth that I had to figure out a time that we could get back on together.
Oh, I'm so glad. I loved it too.
And I'm so glad the squad has brought us together. So for our listeners, update us on what's going on with Representative Omar and her trips around the world that didn't really take off, and accusing people of being phobic, et cetera. Help our listeners understand.
Yeah, well, the last time, what I wrote about just recently at my website is that Ilhan Omar accuses those she hates of being phobic, and it was really all about how she called Donald Trump and, by extension, Prime Minister Netanyahu, said that Netanyahu aligned himself with Islamophobes like Donald Trump. And, of course, that got me going, because this was only a week ago. It seems like forever ago. I was at a conference all weekend, so forgive me if the latest of the
the new cyclone,
antics,
my goodness,
haven't been. But it's always sort of the same theme, and it is that Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar decided that they wanted to go to Israel, not because they like Israel, have any respect for Israel, but because they wanted to go to what they call Palestine, because in their minds, Israel doesn't exist. So first off, how do you really deal with someone who doesn't want to acknowledge your existence, but then tells you you're phobic when you say that there's a problem with what they're doing? What I thought was interesting about this is that Netanyahu basically called Rashida Tlaib's bluff. A lot of people can't tell the difference, but they are different. One is from Minnesota, the other is from the Illinois area, as I remember. Michigan and Detroit. And Tlaib said that the whole reason she wanted to go to what she calls Palestine, and what is indeed the state of Israel, is that she wanted to visit her grandmother. And when Netanyahu called her bluff, and it turns out that, just very briefly by way of explanation in case people forgot, Israel has a policy that, if you're coming to our country to drum up hatred towards our country so that you can destroy us, we don't really want you in our country. Mm-hmm. It's sort of unfortunate that America doesn't do more of that. I think that's one of the many reasons Donald Trump is hated, because the open borders crowd thinks that America should be forever apologetic to the rest of the world for its existence. In Tlaib's case, they suspended the policy on humanitarian grounds, and then the minute Netanyahu said, okay, you can come, but you still can't politic in the BDS movement, which is a rabidly hateful anti-Israel organization that basically its policies, if Israel were to comply with his policies, Israel would probably cease to exist. Yeah. And since Israel has no intention of doing that,
the nerve.
and neither does God, apparently, that's when she decided her grandmother wasn't really all that important. as it relates to Ilhan Omar, I really did kind of zero in this Western Journal piece that I wrote about how the left always calls anybody who dares to disagree with some of their protected groups phobic. Well, phobic, since I did, go to social work school and all that, means that you have an irrational fear of something. And those that have a fear of Islamism, which seeks to spread around the country at the regardless of the disagreement of the people around them, it's not phobic. All you have to do is look at 9/11, which the anniversary of which is coming up shortly, to know that, or look at the scores and scores of Islamic terrorist activities, Muslim terrorist activities. That doesn't mean all Muslims are terrorists.
No.
We're supposed to say that because otherwise we get accused of being racist, bigots, and homophobes. But if you're afraid of, if you walk into a lion's den and you're told you're lion phobic, that's really not a very smart use of the term, okay? So that's what I think is interesting, is that these folks, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, have exhibited again and again and again their hatred for not only Israel but this country. And yet they have the audacity, or if you're Jewish, and even if you're not Jewish, you can say chutzpah. They have the chutzpah. Yes, you just use a lot of phlegm, and then you can say chutzpah, to say that, to call everyone else bigots.
So
when we are beginning to find out that these are the bigots, that they are the bigots.
Yeah, let's take a couple steps back, because I think there's legitimate concern, and then we can get into kind of the questionable. And I think this is where I think we're a lot of we'll have some robust discussion. So there is legitimate, like, she is leveling, Representative Omar is leveling some accusations about phobia. But on the flip side, if she's looking in the mirror, there are legitimate causes for concern. Primarily, there's two we can point to. One, just her very itinerary doesn't even mention Israel, talks about Palestine. And so, like, just even legitimately, just the refusal to recognize Israel on the agenda, on the itinerary, is a cause for concern. But that's rooted in the group that I would be interested, I know our listeners would be very interested to hear, this group that has organized them. And so, talk to us a little bit about MIFTA.
Yeah, I mean, okay. Very good. Somebody wants me. I'm busy. Sorry about that.
I'm so honored. Thank you.
Right. The group MIFTA has supported not only the boycott, divestment, and sanctions, which all four of the so-called squad, I don't know why they call themselves that, they are just atrocious. They're atrocious. And they don't comport America very well, if I can say that. So the BDS movement is basically designed to shut down Israel, to boycott Israel, to shut down its economy, which isn't happening. They don't acknowledge Israel's right to exist. And MIFTA has also celebrated terrorist acts against the Jewish state, and even as far as I've read in my reading, that they deny the Holocaust as well. That's already 3 or 4 of the biggest anti-Semitic markers. We're not talking dog whistles. We're talking actual Jew hatred. Mm-hmm. And as I think you and I may have talked about, Jews are often the canaries in the mine shaft. Mm-hmm. When you look at people, if you look at the list of people who hate the Jewish people because they represent the law, they may not always live up to it. We may not always live up to it, but we're the ones that brought the law. So people, the long list of people who have hated the Jewish people and Israel down through the centuries, part of, and there's never one explanation for anti-Semitism or Jew hatred, is because they detest that there are laws, or that we, just like Hebrew National, answer to a higher authority, mm-hmm. Jews and Christians do. And so there's a great deal of hostility there. And MIFTA is only one of a whole huge host of Islamic groups that are dedicated to wiping Israel off the face of the map, off the earth.
Yeah, I think some of their the things that they have allowed in their publications, as well as some of their overtures in the past, would indicate that they are no friend to Israel, which is problematic in and of itself. But what I want to hone in on after we get back from the break is I want us to hone in a little bit more on, was this a smart move or was this a bad move by the Trump administration to kind of persuade Prime Minister Netanyahu to not allow them to come in. But even just the overture of him allowing, on humanitarian purposes, Representative Tlaib to come in and then her turning it down. We'll look through the wisdom of that relative to kind of some of the political moves. But we've got to take a break. But when we come back, more with Karen Kataline right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined over the phone by Karen Kataline, talking a little bit about anti-Semitism with the squad, specifically looking at Representative Omar and Representative Tlaib. Omar out of Minnesota, Tlaib out of the Detroit area. And if you'll remember from, in this media cyclone, it's hard to kind of keep it's hard to kind of keep account of what's happening on what day. And so this pretty much just dominated the news coverage last weekend, where they were set to go off to Israel. Then come to find out that Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, decides to rescind that invitation, keeps them from coming in. Representative Tlaib has family over in Israel, then makes an appeal for that rescission of the invitation visa, and Benjamin Netanyahu gives her a humanitarian visa to be able to go visit her grandmother. And then in due order, within the day, I believe, within 24 hours, I do know, Representative Tlaib has decided that she was not going to go over there. If she was going to be muzzled, she was going to be silenced by particular individuals. And so then then the press conference happened early last week. And Karen, it just seems like this is a different verse of the same song, that these two individuals continue to just show open hostility toward, and to a certain degree borderline at times, in other degrees just outright gestures that are anti-Semitic in nature. And it raises I've never been to the district. I've never been to her district in Detroit. I don't believe I've specifically been to Representative Omar's district in the Twin Cities, but I just can't help but wonder who are they representing right now? Like, they're just this open hostility towards one of our stalwart allies in the world. I'm baffled by it, and I don't know I don't know where they're getting the gumption, where they're getting the chutzpah to say what they say on a loud stage. Do you know the other side? There's got to be another side of the story, right? How are they justifying this?
Well, another side of the story of what exactly? I mean, the ramifications and what's going on here has so many angles. To answer one of your questions, then please, I'm certainly no expert. When it comes to the Middle East, I am more humble than any other time because of the complexities of it. I mean, you could look at it very simplistically, and you could look at it complexly. You could look at it from a spiritual point of view, from a political point of view. My goodness, it's just huge. And I almost never even write about it because there are people so much more knowledgeable than me on the facts. But in terms of everyday people watching this in the political landscape, I thought it was incredibly instructive. For one thing, there are high numbers of Muslims in those areas. Mm-hmm. There's just no question about it. Yeah. We know that Dearborn is highly, has a very high population of Muslims. So that begs the question, did they come here legally? Did they come here illegally? Did they come here with refugee status or not? Did they come like the Syrians came to Germany not very long ago with an enormous amount of money backed by George Soros? So there is a lot. If you start to connect the dots, I have read in my reading that these two representatives are there specifically to put forth the so-called Palestinian point of view. Well, first of all, even Arabs have admitted that Palestine as a country never really existed. It was made up after the fact in order to stick it to Israel. You have to ask yourself, and then, again, it's a complex issue, why is Israel held to an entirely different standard than if you were to put the shoe on the other foot? If you put the shoe on the other foot and a Jewish person wanted to go to Syria or Lebanon, forget Lebanon, I mean, it's a mess too. Any of the Arab countries that have shown and continue to show for more than 50 plus years hostility towards Israel, and she wants to go there to make a visit, do you think the country would hold them to any sort of standard? Are there any Jews in those Arab countries to speak of, or are they unsafe to even be there? The Jews in Iraq were kicked out of the country with the clothes on their back. They had to leave everything in Iraq when the Shah came in. Wait a minute, yes. And on it goes. There's an entirely different standard. So apropos of the left, if you can claim to be the greater victim, then suddenly anything you do and say is okay. And the Muslim faction, the activists, have learned the leftist language. And in my piece, I have said that I really seriously doubt that Rashida Tlaib or Ilhan Omar are the left, are the Democrats they profess to be. They're not, because nothing in their religion supports the same things that the left supports. And we know this. I mean, if you are a practicing Muslim, I mean, it is the very antithesis of what the left professes to believe, including throwing gays off buildings and hanging them from cranes. But when you ask the left or anyone else, what do they think about this? What do they think about women's rights in Muslim countries? They're crickets.
Yeah, I think one of the things
one of the things I'm really interested in and concerned by is there is a difference to be made between criticizing Israeli policies and then criticizing Israeli Jews. Like, it kind of goes back to here in the U.S. There's one thing for me to be able to launch character attacks on someone. It's another thing for me able to launch, I just disagree with someone. I can disagree with someone without demonizing someone. And it seems as though more often than not, there are certain members of Congress that play upon very anti-Semitic stereotypes, dominion, nefarious, hypnotizing the world, some of these things that we've seen in some of Representative Omar's tweets, some of the comments about Representative Tlaib, that when they play upon those old stereotypes that are anti-Semitic in nature, and then they play ignorance, or in turn, like you've highlighted in your piece, claim to be the victims when they suffer the consequences for some of the decisions that they've made. It's very revealing to me, but it's also it's very discouraging to me that this type of thing still exists, if that makes sense. It does. It makes total sense. And the dirty little secret is that in most Arab schools, in madrasas, in Arab countries in general, Jew hatred is like mother's milk. It is taught like we teach the ABCs.
Yeah.
And has been for decades. Yeah. I mean, you remember some of those very disturbing videos, and not very many of them make it, you know, in English, where Yasser Arafat was cheering on like a 6-year-old who was spewing hatred towards Jews and kill them. I mean, there's been nothing of a peaceful message coming from the Arab countries. And very frankly, when they do want to make peace, because it's in their best interest, as in Jordan, when King Hussein, who was educated in America, when they want to make peace, they're very quiet about it, because they know they could end up like Sadat.
Yeah. Well,
and that's
Karen,
one of the complexities of it.
Yeah, Karen, well, thank you so much for joining us. If you want to find out more information on Karen Kataline, you can find that out at KarenKataline.com, or go to the Point of View website, pointofview.net, to find out more information on Karen, some of the great work she's doing on her website, as well as over at Western Journalism. We'll be back right after this.
Point of View is committed to spreading the truth, oftentimes a truth that those in political power don't like getting heard. But the only way it can be heard is if our team stands strong together, if you do what you can to support the Point of View Truth Team. It's having an impact, as we heard recently from U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert.
Everywhere I go, I hear people that you have influenced, that Point of View has affected. You have made such a difference, and you rely on people to contribute, and if they don't contribute, then that truth does not get heard.
Help Point of View make a difference. Pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more. Please do what you can. 1-800-347-5151, or visit online, pointofview.net. Look near the top right for the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team, 800-347-5151, and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I've recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this Monday, August 26, 2019 day. I am your host, Nick Pitts. So grateful that you have decided to keep on joining us today. We have had on during the first hour, we had a little bit from Jonathan Merritt talking about the 2020 evangelical vote. Some recent gestures made by the Democratic candidates seem to appear as though certain Democratic candidates, i.e. Pete Buttigieg, the mayor out of South Bend, as well as Cory Booker, the senator from New Jersey, are bringing on faith outreach directors onto their campaign to try to attempt to vie and win that religious vote. And it appears as though some of the numbers are indicative that they're not sold on President Trump yet. A recent Morning Consult poll found that 55% of evangelicals, white evangelicals, said that they would place President Trump at the top of the ticket. While this obviously is a majority, it does raise the question, especially when you consider it from a historical comparison, why is that not a stronger contingent of evangelical voters? Recent history would indicate over the past 20 to 30 years that evangelicals have largely in the 70s to, even with President Trump, lower 80 percentile approve and vote for him and support him in the candidacy. And so we'll be talking a little bit about, we talked a little bit about that, and then we transitioned and talked with Karen Kataline about some of the anti-Semitism and the phobias that have been kind of lingering over into the evangelical, or not necessarily evangelical world, but in the Congress, in the House of Representatives. And so we talked with her about kind of where this is stemming from, as well as where this potentially may be going as well. And so coming up this hour, though, we're going to switch gears and talk a little bit about some of the top news of the day. We'll talk a little bit about Joe Walsh, the former Illinois congressman that has now put his hat into the ring for the 2020 campaign. And we'll also be talking with Kyle Mann as well. Kyle will be joining us over the phone. He is the editor-in-chief of the Babylon Bee, a popular Christian news satire site. He's written for the site since its founding over 3 years ago and now runs its daily operations. He's also the co-author of How to Be a Perfect Christian. His site has come under the news as of late because there has been certain fact-checking sites, i.e. Snopes, has been kind of been leveling accusations against him and his site. And it does raise the question as to whether America can take a joke anymore. And so we'll be joined by him actually right now. Kyle, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hey, Kyle, how are you today?
Doing good. How are you?
Doing well. Well, thanks so much for joining us. So, Kyle, your site has been has made my stomach hurt. I've laughed so much, but other people feel as though it's hurting the U.S. because they're going after it. So, tell our audience a little bit about what's happening right now over at the Babylon Bee in the larger American context.
Yeah, we've been going on for a few years now, and we tell jokes that relate to Christian culture, as well as politics and current events, and just general satire of everyday life. And Snopes has fact-checked us many times. You know, Snopes is kind of the premier urban legend fact-checker, and they've gotten into checking current events and such. And they've fact-checked us many times, but recently they published a fact-check of one of our pieces, and it got a lot more insidious. Their accusations in the fact check were basically that we are sharing fake news and we're trying to deceive people, even though our articles are pretty obviously a joke.
Mm-hmm. And does this have repercussions on the site when you get fact checked, and then when they label you fake news, et cetera?
Well, it absolutely has in the past, because Snopes actually used to be the official fact checker of Facebook.
Wow.
They've recently broken off that relationship, but in the past, Facebook would actually ding your site and your page would start getting hidden, and you wouldn't be able to advertise. You'd be demonetized and deplatformed if you shared too much fake news. And so we've gotten warnings from Facebook, that our page may be taken down or squashed or whatever because we're sharing jokes that a fact checker thought was fake news.
Is there a theme to some of the issues that they have? Is it when you're poking fun of the ideological left? Is it when you're hitting on particular issues? Is there any rhyme or reason as to some of the issues that they've had with the Babylon Bee?
Yeah, I mean, they've definitely fact-checked the pieces that make fun of the left more often.
Uh-huh.
They have fact-checked the other pieces from time to time. And, they claim that they only fact-check pieces when a lot of people are getting confused. But if you look at a piece like, we did a piece that said that CNN purchased a giant washing machine to spin the news in. And, obviously it's silly. It's a joke,
Yeah.
And it's obviously silly on its face. And they fact-checked it like right away. It was the next day or something. No, CNN did not purchase a giant washing machine, and they're not spinning their news stories in it. And they do that.
You've got to be kidding me.
Yeah, and they do this piece by piece debunking of it. It's like, it's impossible to spin the news, and there's no evidence that CNN purchased a washing machine. And it's like, oh my gosh, it's the ultimate like guy who doesn't get the joke, and then just does this ultra literal interpretation of it.
So what do you attribute this to? Is there a particular group that has a vengeance toward? Is this like a self-reporting mechanism? Like, what is it just because you all are becoming increasingly more popular? What do you attribute this to? Is it simply just ideological reasons that they have for the jokes?
Well, I would like to. I'm not a guy who likes to cry persecution. I don't sit there and say, Christians are being persecuted and conservatives are being persecuted. I don't like that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's really strange, and it's because they fact check leftist sites. They fact check sites like The Onion, but their fact checks are very very benign. It says, it's obviously just a joke, and if you didn't get it, then the joke's on you. And then our piece, they do these long pieces where they say, they're muddying the details. This is a ruse. They're intentionally deceiving their readers and all this. So it definitely seems ideological to me.
And what have you all done in response? So I'm reading, I ran across a Wall Street Journal op-ed that you penned over, I guess, right before the weekend got started. And it seems like you all are moving forward and trying to address this. What have been your interactions as you've reached out to Snopes to try to rectify this problem?
Yeah, we sent over a letter from our lawyers and, basically told them they needed to withdraw that fact check they did, and the one that was particularly insidious recently. And they did edit it, but they left in a lot of the weasel words that suggested we were deceiving people. Privately between us and Snopes, they've assured us, we understand that it's satire, and we're going to do better at making sure you're just labeled a joke and satire and not fake news. But, publicly, they're publishing studies saying, the Babylon Bee is the most deceitful content on the internet, and they're publishing these long editorials saying this is why we need to fact check the Babylon Bee. So what they're saying in private and what they're doing in public are totally at odds.
Wow. Well, we have got to take a break right now, but when we come back from the break, I want to talk a little bit more. We'll talk a little bit more with Kyle about what's happening at the Babylon Bee as Snopes continues to just be very antagonistic and very non-even-handed against them. And so we'll be talking about that as well, kind of some of the broader picture. Are we just not able to take jokes anymore when it comes to the political arena? Are we kind of goes back to that Twain quote, laughter is the best medicine for life. And so are we just going to increasingly be a country that cannot have medicine? We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Here's a question for you. If one government program creates a major problem so that you need a government bailout to fix that problem, wouldn't it make more sense not to implement the government program in the first place? That is the question some are asking about the current proposal known as Medicare for All. Recently, Senator Bernie Sanders proposed a $20 billion federal bailout for struggling hospitals. He announced this plan in Philadelphia because one of the hospitals is currently in bankruptcy proceedings. The editors of the Wall Street Journal observed that usually politicians pass a bailout to clean up a mess they created in the past. In this case, they suggest the senator wants taxpayers to save hospitals after he bankrupts them. Let me explain why they say that. The hospital in Philadelphia currently has nearly two-thirds of their patients on government insurance, either Medicare or Medicaid. Those programs are notorious for paying hospitals less than what it costs to provide services. Some estimate that they pay about 90% or even less than the actual cost of care. So how do hospitals traditionally cover their cost? Well, they shift cost onto private insurers, which tend to pay more than 140% of cost, at least according to the American Hospital Association. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services report that more than two-thirds of hospitals are losing money on Medicare inpatient services. If Medicare for All was implemented, hospitals would go broke. That is what former member of Congress John Delaney said in the June Democratic presidential debate. He said if you go to hospitals and ask them what would happen if they were paid at the Medicare rate, every single hospital administrator said they would close. Perhaps you can now see why the editors at the Wall Street Journal pointed to this hospital bailout as a preview of what could happen with Medicare for All. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Affirm Films and the Kendrick Brothers, Overcomer, starring Alex Kendrick and Priscilla Shirer, rated PG, now playing in theaters. Overcomermovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. I'm joined over the phone by the editor-in-chief of the Babylon Bee. We've got Kyle Mann that's joining us. Kyle finds himself leading an organization right now that is doing battle with the fact-checking website Snopes. And so Snopes has been going after the Babylon Bee, just a satirical website, but apparently they have gone too far. And so, Kyle, I was thinking about it over the break. Would you do you know if Snopes is going after other organizations that are more satirical in nature, that kind of use the news of the day to kind of make jokes? So like I'm thinking about websites like The Onion, for example, that would be more on the left side that's making particular jokes, but it is, again, an equal opportunity joke maker. It seems like, are they going after other websites like this, or really honing in on the Babylon Bee?
Yeah, they fact check The Onion, and they fact check Borowitz Report and other sites. But that's really the issue here, is that they've singled us out with fact checks that accuse us of having these sinister motives, and they don't do that when they fact check other sites, and that's what makes us think it's some kind of ideological agenda here, because we're successful comedians who are making fun of the left a lot. Yeah. We're not even necessarily a conservative site. We're a Christian site that happens to make fun of everybody, including the left, and they don't like that.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I so appreciate about you all. That yes, there is a sense that you do make fun of the left, but I mean, you also are the one. Like, it was your piece on Robert Jeffers and the that you made probably 6 months ago. I wish I could. I remember sending it out to all of my friends just because I thought it was just so hilarious, because it reminds, like, jesters do oft prove to be prophets, right? Like, you just Like the idea of joking is just a palatable way to be able to reveal a particular truth. And so that does raise a question, because this has been going on for some time now. Has this changed any of the way that you've done certain things? Have y'all had to change a little bit as you're in this mediating stage with lawyers?
We're a little more careful, obviously, with what we would say publicly about Snopes, just because we're trying to, obviously lawyers are talking to us and saying, hey, you can't say this, or you can't say that. But I mean, we haven't, we've made fun of Snopes on our site before.
Yeah.
When people started to kind of complain to Snopes, we've actually never really had a problem when they've fact checked us in the past, because it was always, fairly innocuous. They would just say, oh, this is a joke. Uh-huh. But although they did always file us under junk news, that was the category for our. But we're still making jokes about Snopes, and so we haven't changed that. We see no reason to let off the pressure there. Yeah,
Kyle, just from being in your position for as long as you have been, and then just obviously from your purview, is this a sign of something to come? Are we just increasingly becoming a country that just can't laugh at ourselves, or that political jokes is that just kind of off limits now? Is that where we're headed, or do you think this is just a minor blip and we'll get back to being able to be equal opportunity laughters for those on the left and those on the right?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I definitely feel like the left right now are the ones who take themselves very seriously. Mm-hmm. The right has been used to being the punching bag of comedy. So people that are on the right are used to tuning into Saturday Night Live every week and seeing themselves getting slammed and mocked. Yeah. And they've kind of developed a thicker skin, for the most part, because of it. And you don't see that on the left. So they do not like that their ideas are being put on display, and we're mocking those ideas. They don't like that. And I don't know. I don't see that ending anytime soon, as long as they continue to take their ideas so seriously.
So I'd be interested, because I can't help but think, like, the picture I always go back to when I think about making fun of individuals on the left. So growing up, I remember the SNL skits of making fun of President Clinton and his affinity for McDonald's, and kind of going on those runs where you had the late Phil Hartman, going on those runs with and making his little breaks in the McDonald's. And so there has been jokes on the left. I do have like a working theory as to, I know you said it's just kind of they're taking their ideas seriously, and I really appreciate the idea of not wanting to cry wolf, of cry persecution on your side. Is there certain specifics? Is there certain, I'm just trying to think, is there particular issues that you've touched on that really have drawn the ire of Snopes and others? Is there certain things that you've done that that this is going to create a backlash, that inevitably that will just be the thing that causes endless meetings and problems to arise outside of the web? Like, I want to know, have you learned anything in the midst of this? Like, like when I publish this thing, it's going to go crazy.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's two basic types of satire that we publish, and there's the obviously over the top stuff. So we'll do it. We did a joke about Representatives Tlaib and Omar sneaking into Israel. We said they stacked themselves on top of each other inside of a trench coat.
I loved that from Mary Kate and Ashley. It was hilarious.
Yeah, right. The classic trope. So we use that, and 100% of people, I bet. Well, I mean, there's always that one person who doesn't get it, but the vast majority of people understand the joke. But some satire has to cut closer to the truth. And when you want to expose their ideas, so we do stuff where we make up a quote, and it's altered just enough where it's like, oh, it's a gut punch at the end when you read it and you go, oh, they're making fun of that quote he said, but they changed that word. And some people just don't have that gene to detect that that's satire. And we're not going to stop doing those pieces because of that. But we do have to recognize that some people can mistake that for real news.
And is there a balance too? Because I'd be interested to know, is it really just whoever has the best joke, that's what kind of gets published out? Because I think one of the things I appreciate about you all is that you are balanced. Like you're not afraid to make fun of the right. You're not afraid to make fun of the left. You're not afraid to make fun of Christians, even though I don't think you align politically on either side, but you do. You are unashamedly Christian, from what I understand. And I think that's one of the things I so appreciated about it. Like, so I'm looking at an article right now. I was looking for the one that you all did back in 2016, I think, but one that I just now caught my eyes. Robert Jeffers weeps bitterly after denying Trump 3 times. Like, it's just really, it's just funny. Like, regardless of whatever side that you're on. So in your editing process, is there like, we've got to have out 3 pieces on this side, 3 pieces on that side, or is it really just the best joke and the news dictates the day?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely don't sit down and say this has to be perfectly 100% balanced. And I think that would take a lot of the flavor and uniqueness out of it too.
Yeah.
Because then it's not, people then don't appreciate the Babylon Bee's specific perspective on this issue. It's, they just had to throw out a piece about Trump because they just made fun of Ocasio-Cortez. And that's not the case. We make fun of whoever's being ridiculous. And sometimes the left are the ones who are being more ridiculous at a given time. Sometimes the right are the ones who are being more ridiculous. So, that's kind of our position, is we're the court jester that sits there and just makes fun of people who do dumb things.
That's what So for our listeners, what can our listeners know? How can they support you all? Is there anything that they can do to really highlight this issue and just come behind y'all and support y'all during this?
Yeah, I mean, you can visit us at babylonb.com. We actually have subscription services now where people can subscribe on a monthly basis and help support us financially. And some of these legal bills that we have against folks are stacking up. So we obviously appreciate any support we get from that.
That's phenomenal. So, well, Kyle, thank you so much for joining us. We greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Okay, so you can find out more information on the Babylon Bee at babylonb.com. Again, www.babylonb.com. Or you can go to the Point of View website, pointofview.net, to find out more information on Kyle and some of the work that they're doing. You can follow them on their social media platforms and handles. And so I won't share those with you because I'll probably get them wrong. And so I'll go ahead and just direct you towards our website. If you want a good laugh, I would highly recommend subscribing to their newsletter that they put out once a month, as well as following them along on social media. I have found that laughter is good for the soul, that laughter is the best weapon in a harsh world. As Twain said, like, jesters do oft prove to be prophets. I think there's a great medicine that comes from some of the work that they're doing, and I consider me exceedingly grateful for some of the stuff that they put out to help us laugh in this kind of harsh world. And so we're grateful for them, and if you want to go support them, you can do so at babylonb.com. But we have got to take a break right now. But when we come back from the break, we're going to open up the phone lines. We're going to make our way through the news of the day, look through Representative Walsh and some of the work that he has now decided that he is going to put himself out there and run for presidency on the Republican primary side. We'll talk about some of the context of that and some of the foreboding signs in that as well. And then we'll also talk about cat ladies. On this National Dog Day, there is a new study that indicates that individuals that there's not any distinguishable qualities that separates a cat lady from a dog person. And so we'll talk a little bit about that in our segment, News You Can Use. And so we will be back, though, after these commercial breaks, right after this.
From Affirm Films, Provident Films, and the Kendrick Brothers comes Overcomer.
John Harrison is a frustrated coach questioning his value until he crosses paths with a student struggling on her own journey.
What have you allowed to define you? When you find your identity in the one who created you, it'll change your whole perspective.
Overcomer, starring Alex Kendrick and Priscilla Shirer. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. Now playing. More information is available at overcomermovie.com.
It's been said that a lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is putting on its shoes. That was definitely true in the 19th century when preacher Charles Spurgeon said it. But here in the 21st century, truth can be just as fast. Think about it. When Point of View presents the truth, it reaches people across America and around the world instantly. You make that instant truth a reality when you join the Point of View Radio Truth Team. Get all the details now at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I'm your host, Nick Pitts. Man, what a show it has been. We have just run the gamut of people. We just got off the phone with Kyle Mann, who's the editor-in-chief of the Babylon Bee. You can find out more information, or you can re-listen to that interview by going to our Facebook page at facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Go to our website at pointofview.net to find out more information on some of the work that they're doing. Man, they find themselves I don't kind of feel bad. I really feel bad for them. They're having to battle Snopes, which is a fact-checking site Babylon Bee it's a satirical site. It uses the news to share jokes. And as Shakespeare said, gestures do oft prove to be prophets. And so they just kind of highlight some of the incongruencies or maybe just some of the errors of thinking. And it really does, but it's in a joking fashion. I can't help but see a Babylon Bee headline or article and just laugh all the way through it. They're equal opportunity jokesters, joking individuals on the left and right. They don't align politically on either side. They're just unashamedly Christian. They're funny at that, but yet Snopes has continued to get after them to the extent that they having to downgrade some of their it's just a hubbub of mess that they're in right now, and so labeling them junk news and trying to squelch their presence on social media websites. And so you can find out more information on Babylon Bee and find out ways you can support them by going to our website or jumping over to their website at babylonbee.com. Then we talked with Karen Kataline a little earlier about Representative Omar and some of the salacious remarks that she has made relative to Israel, and then the phobias she continues to throw around, and some of the anti-Semitic remarks that she makes. And so that was a fascinating conversation. It's just very. I don't know about you all, but I'm just very concerned with this rise of anti-Semitism, some of the language that's utilized by individuals, as well as some of the anti-Semitic acts and these hate crimes that are being perpetuated here in the U.S. And so I highly recommend some of the work that she's doing, which you can find on our website at www.pointofview.net. And then you can make your way over. Then during 1 o'clock, man, it seems like forever ago, we talked with Jonathan Merritt talking about, can Democrats get the evangelical vote? There's been much talk about some of the work that they have done, Democrats have done or really didn't do during the 2016 campaign. And it seems like they are rectifying some of those mistakes relative to Pete Buttigieg, the mayor from South Bend, hiring a faith outreach director, as well as Senator Cory Booker also doing that as well. And so we'll see if they can garner up and gather and get some evangelicals to vote for Democrats, because it appears as though President Trump has an 84% approval rating among Republicans, that number among evangelicals right now sits at 55%. So that's a little bit below what it traditionally is, at least traditionally as in the past 30 years of support among evangelicals and the 2020 campaign with the Republican president. And so, but which brings me kind of to the topic at hand. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but what's fascinating is we see that President Trump is getting another challenger. So former governor of Massachusetts, the former Libertarian candidate on the 2016 ballot, Bill Weld, has decided to run against President Trump in the Republican primary for the 2020 nomination. But he was joined yesterday, appearing on George Stephanopoulos' This Week. Joe Walsh, who's the former Illinois congressman, said he will challenge President Trump. One of the interesting things that has happened relative to Representative Walsh is that he said he was going to run for president. Video surfaced in 2015 at a Turning Points USA. He said that he was going to run for president. So this, to a certain degree, it shouldn't shock us, but also to another degree, you have to wonder where this has come from. But he told George Stephanopoulos that this country cannot afford to have him being President Trump, win. If I'm not successful, he said, quote, I'm not voting for him. But not only did he announce his run for president, but also he announced some apologies for past comments that he has made. He has made some racist slurs relative to our former president, President Barack Obama, as well as some comments on the birther issue. He was an early birther, as well as just some other kind of scandalous comments, to say the very least. But what I am interested in is this idea of, does the past, so as we're looking to Representative Walsh's, former Congressman Walsh's past comments, does the past reveal clues for us in the present as we consider the 2020 election? You know, Winston Churchill said, the further you look back into the past, the more clearly you can see into the future rather. And I think if we look into the past, specifically 1992 as well as 1980, we can see some clues that might be able to help us better understand what 2020 could hold. In 1992, Politico, I guess you could say, Pat Buchanan, formerly of the Nixon campaign, who's just always been in political circles stretching back to the 70s, challenged then President George H.W. Bush for the Republican nomination. Though he went down in defeat, Buchanan's convention speech still reverberates to this day, going down in history. He said, quote, "There's a religious war going on in this country. It's a cultural war, as critical to the kind of nation we shall be as the Cold War itself. For this war is for the soul of America." He concluding with a rousing call to take back our cities, take back our culture, and to take back our country. Many can point to that a 1992 speech and say that that was a sneak preview of what now President Trump would do in the 2016 campaign to really bring to fruition kind of the seeds that were sown by Buchanan in that 1992 speech. And so but then let's look to the Democratic side, because I think the Democratic side really shows us what potentially could be happening in 2020 should President Trump lose. What happened when then President Carter lost when he was challenged by then Senator Kennedy. It was in 1980 with Senator Kennedy challenging then President Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was suffering pretty low in the polls, and he would eventually go on to just a significant stinging loss. And that loss didn't start in November. That loss started in Chicago at that infamous Democratic National Convention. If you'll remember, there was the lack of warmness between Senator Kennedy and then President Carter when Carter was named the nominee for the 1980 Democratic Party for the 1980 presidential election. That frosty kind of cold shoulder that was on display at that 1980 convention, the lack of unity that was in the Democratic Party, it was just a very telling sign. And then so not only did Kennedy may have lost that nomination process in 1980 for the Democratic position, but then Carter would go on to lose upwards of 40 states in the Electoral College during the general election in 1980. But then this was also in the midst where there was just a lot of loss that was happening across the country. And what John Ward chronicles in his book, in Camelot's End, I thought he made a fascinating comparison in the conclusion. He said, quote, "Whether Trump is the last gasp of the Reagan coalition, just as Carter marked the end of the FDR era for the Democratic Party, remains to be seen." So what he is saying in this moment with Ward is that Carter was the last gasp of that FDR coalition, that Carter really did illuminate, that Carter-Kennedy infighting illuminated two significant factions within the Democratic Party, and drawing comparisons to President Trump. Is President Trump, is there factions within the Republican Party that should he lose or should he win the nomination but lose the presidency, as some polls are indicating right now? But again, it's very early to say, should he lose, is this going to be a replay of what happened in 1980? These two factions. Now you can consider me skeptical of Walsh's chances, especially since President Trump has an 84% approval rating among Republicans. But his decision to run reminds us of our obligation to vote. This civic benefit is a divine opportunity to love your neighbor in a systemic fashion. Walsh wants your vote, but the biblical narrative should influence it. And with that, we have got to take a break right now. But when we come back from the break, we're going to give a little bit more attention to a couple of other issues. I want to look at a study that indicates that Americans' values are changing significantly here in the U.S. And then I want to hop over as well. And, on this National Dog Day, it only makes sense for us to talk about the cat lady. And is there any support behind it? And what C.S. Lewis would have us to know about a cat lady. But we have got to take a break. But when we come back, more from Point of View right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View for this last segment of today's show. I am your host, Nick Pitts. We'll be joining tomorrow. We'll have the Millennial Roundtable, so you want to stick around. You can keep on listening to this radio station if you'd like, or you can just kind of jump back in. But I do want to draw attention to a couple of things on this last day before the Millennial Roundtable. We've got a couple of other articles that I want to share with you, but I also want to illuminate something else. Yes, today is National Dog Day on this August 26, 2019 day, but it's also the first day back at school. And so I left the college I left the Dallas Baptist University campus to come here to the studio to be around my Point of View family and to talk with you all. And then also I will go back to it, and I just need you to know, I don't know if you all remember when you went to school on that first day in college, but there's just a level of excitement that is on the college campus right now, across campuses all across the U.S., but specifically at Dallas Baptist University. It is just excitement. And I think the reason why there's so much excitement that's happening at Dallas Baptist University right now is just there's just something significant going on there. Now, I know I'm biased like CNN. Don't get me wrong. Like I know I've got my tinge, but I do want to share there's just some great stuff that's happening. We've got General James Mattis that's going to be joining us on campus here next month. He's got a new book out called Call Sign Chaos. And so the former defense secretary is going to be joining us on campus. And so you can find out more information on that event if you're in the Dallas area at www.dbu.edu/IGE. It's going to be a great event where he kind of helps us better understand his new book and just some of his experiences that he's had, his storied military career, as well as just the public service he had in the administration as well as in the government as well. And so you'll want to pay attention to that, and we'll have some more resources on that. But then there's just excitement in the college campus. You've got so many of these young students. I feel like an old man now. I can't believe I just said young students. My goodness gracious. I need to go do something without maturity to be credible again. But I just really am excited for the new school year. And I know Dallas Baptist is just such a special place. There's 5,000 students that are on campus today that are receiving an education that is pursuing after excellence without forsaking faithfulness. These are students that are coming from over 50 different countries. Over 600 students are coming from a different country of 5,000. So that's a pretty significant sum. And these classrooms may be diverse from individuals from all across the country, all across the world, really. But they're all learning about their disciplines, but two, seeing how we have a God of the universe who holds all things together. And so integrating their faith with their learning is just such a key part. And to know that these students are going to be trained up in order to be sent out. When you think about Dallas Baptist University, I guess you could think that potentially they may be going into churches. Well, yes, 10% of them are going into vocational ministry where they will be they will be the next senior pastors. They'll be the next associate ministers, music, mission ministers, next youth ministers. But 90% of those students will be going into the boardroom. They will be going into the classroom. They'll be going into finance. They'll be going into commercial real estate. Individuals that are being trained up to what Bob Buford said, they'll be roaring lions. And that's just really exciting to be able to see in a world in which the religious, there's a growing number of individuals that classify as being religiously unaffiliated, religious nuns. There's a growing number of individuals that don't go to church on Sunday morning. There's a growing number of individuals that don't pray, growing number of individuals that aren't reading the biblical narrative, growing number of individuals that aren't giving, growing number of individuals that aren't joining civic institutions. But one thing that is growing is our unemployment rate, because more and more people are going to work. And these are the students that are going into those same workplaces, and they have got a hope that is set within them, and they're being trained up in order that they might be competent at the job they go to, but also that they might have the character that might point to Christ and him crucified and resurrected on their behalf. And so that kind of stuff excites me to know that that's kind of the place I get to go back to But I'm exceedingly grateful to be a part of this, and I want to encourage you to go to the DBU website or pay us a visit at Dallas Baptist University. We've got some great students, as I've already alluded to, that love to give you a tour. And I'd love to share a corny joke with you if you happen to come on campus. And so, I've got plenty of those. And so, but without further ado, let's move into the news you can lose section. Okay. So this is a study that was published in Fox News, and I thought it was just too good to pass up on this National Dog Day. The news, the headline, crazy cat lady stereotype has no evidence to support it. So it turns out dog owners are just as sensitive to their pets' needs as the proverbial crazy cat ladies we're always hearing so much about. And the study published in the Royal Society Open Science appears to debunk the idea of the crazy cat lady altogether. Not only because dog owners are similarly empathetic to the sounds of their distressed pets, but also because cat owners show no signs of being more anxious, emotionally, or depressed than their doggy, doting counterparts. Upon examining the results from the study's 511 participants, their hypotheses did not hold up. According to the researcher, we found no differences between cat owners and other participants on any of the self-reported measures of anxiety, depression, or experiences in relationships. So consider this. According to the Seattle Times, new data shows that Portland has the most cat ladies, with nearly 1 in every 10 single women owning at least one feline. A 2015 study found that cat owners were 1/3 more likely to live alone than dog owners and twice as likely to live in an apartment. Today, pets are assuming a greater part of our lives. 65% of pet owners admitted to taking more photos of their pets than their significant other. 47% of couples said leaving their pet for a week would be more difficult than their partner. 81% of pet owners consider their pets full family members. You see, pets serve as good gifts from God that reveal our godly longing for community. C.S. Lewis told this story of a woman who thought her cat was God. This was problematic in two regards. One, it kept her from enjoying her cat, and two, it kept her from knowing God. This cat lady couldn't enjoy her cat because she had godlike expectations upon it. And in turn, this cat couldn't be God because, after all, it was created by God. And so, what do we find? Unrealistic expectations squelch sources of happiness. When Jesus says, lean not on your own understanding, but acknowledge me in all of your ways, he is offering us the alluring invitation, to place godlike expectations upon him, because he is the rock of all ages. He is our mighty fortress. He is the pillar, the cornerstone, who cannot be shaken. He is the one that we can lean on and trust in certain circumstances, in every circumstance, rather, because he has proven to be true that he will be faithful to us and faithfully with us till the very end. Pets can make great gifts, but they make horrible gods. So don't be the crazy cat lady. Well, we have got to end this show for today. And so thank you so much for tuning in and joining us. You're going to want to stick around, or you'll want to be back here tomorrow. I'll be joined by my counterpoints. We'll have Chelsea Yeoman of the Human Coalition Action, HUCO Action, will be joining me tomorrow for the Millennial Roundtable. We'll be talking about a whole host of issues, and you're going to want to find out more information on tomorrow's show on our website at www.pointofview.net. And also be sure to check out our Facebook page. You can go to www.facebook.com/pointofviewradio. We'd really appreciate your like and your support. And so without further ado, Andrew, Steve, thank you so much. And I'll be back here tomorrow.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I